We've been talking about evidence for climate change. So we talked about what climate change is and how it's caused by greenhouse gases. And then we talked about the first piece of evidence here. So you guys should already have this written down in your notes. So the first piece of evidence here is that CO2 in our atmosphere is increasing. And we saw that. We saw that CO2 has never been this high until now, not in the last 400,000 years. So what I want you to write underneath that, not number 2, we're not to number 2 yet, but underneath that, what I want you to write is increasing CO2 concentrations mirror increasing global temperature. So what does this mean? Well, to mirror something is to mimic it or to copy it. So as you can see from this chart here, in the blue we have CO2, okay? And as this CO2 increases, the red, the temperature increases as well. As CO2 decreases, temperature decreases. And we see that pattern go on and on. So if our CO2 in our atmosphere is increasing and our temperature is also increasing, we can say that this is a piece of evidence for climate change. And the fact that humans are now causing this increased CO2, we can say that humans are also causing the increase in temperature. So again, as far back as we can go, 400,000 years, we see that CO2 and temperature are linked. So if we keep increasing the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, the temperature will keep increasing as well. So our next piece of evidence is melting glaciers. So we have a big glacier here. This was in 1909. And as you can see in 2004, this glacier is gone, okay? It's disappeared, it's melted. Why? Well, increased temperatures cause ice to melt more, okay? And as these glaciers melt, we increase the amount of water that's in the ocean. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Glacier National Park. You don't need to write this down. Glacier National Park is in Montana, and it's called Glacier National Park because there are a lot of glaciers. Well, by 2030, it is estimated that all of the glaciers are going to disappear. So no longer will we have glaciers in Glacier National Park. All right, number 3, sea level rise. Again, you only need to write this top part in the box. You don't need to write the bottom part. The sea level rise. So as temperatures increase, glaciers and ice are going to melt, and this is going to increase water levels around the world. Now, this is not a real picture, okay? This is just something funny somebody made, but eventually if the sea level rises enough, we could get coastal areas underwater. And I'll show you a map that demonstrates that in a minute. So sea level rise is a big issue for areas that are really low-lying areas or areas on the coast. Here's a map. Again, don't write this down. And this map shows the effects of a study. So this study says we can expect the oceans to rise between 2.5 and 6.5 feet by 2100. Now, why is there such a big range here? Well, it depends. If we cut down our emissions of greenhouse gases, it might be more like 2.5. If we keep emitting the same amount or more of greenhouse gases, it might be 6.5 feet. Okay, so the red dots here show you the places that would be underwater if there was 2.5 feet of sea level rise. The yellow shows you 6.5 feet. So as you can tell, a lot of Florida would be underwater. This is another picture that shows a prediction of what might happen if sea level rises. This is South America, and all this light blue area here is area that would be underwater, okay? So as you can imagine, this has a lot of effects. It can displace people, ruin ecosystems, and it can have a big effect on the economy. All right, number 4. Again, just write this top part. Global temperature rise. What's another piece of evidence for climate change? Well, the temperature is increasing. So since 1880, the average global temperature has risen 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And temperatures are expected to rise 2 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. Now, 1.4 degrees might not seem like a lot, but it's a lot for some organisms, especially organisms that can't move very quickly because they can't just migrate north where it's colder. It's also a lot for organisms like coral, which are really sensitive to temperature changes in the ocean. And so a little temperature change can actually kill them. Again, we have a range here, 2 to 10 degrees. Why? Well, it depends. It depends on if we keep emitting the same amount of fossil fuels or if we emit different, less amounts of fossil fuels. All right, number 5, melting sea ice and ice sheets. So this is different from glaciers. Glaciers are pieces of ice on land. Sea ice or icebergs are in the ocean. They're floating pieces of ice. Now, why is this important? Okay, this is super important because when the ice is on the water, the sunlight is reflected. Same thing happens if you go outside and it's snowy and it's sunny and there's a lot of snow on the ground and it's really bright and you have to squint. The reason you have to squint is because the sunlight is reflecting off of the ice and snow. So here, when we have icebergs in the Arctic, the sunlight is reflected. Now, when those icebergs melt, instead of that sunlight being reflected, it goes into the oceans, which is fine, but it causes the oceans to heat up. And we know that when oceans heat up, we're going to get more ice melting, which means more sunlight and more heat in the oceans, and it keeps going. It's a cycle. Okay? This is also a famous polar bear picture. A lot of people like to use it to refer to climate change. No, this doesn't happen. Polar bears can swim. Somebody photoshopped this. So if you see this, just know, no, this does not happen. And last but not least, increase in extreme weather events. Why is this an issue? Well, first of all, as you guys have seen, there have been some pretty big storms in your lifetime, okay? Lots of tornadoes, Hurricane Katrina, big catastrophic storms. So what climate change does is it increases the temperature. And when we increase the temperature, more water can evaporate from the oceans and more water can be stored in the air as water vapor. So when we get more air in the water as water vapor, we get more clouds, which means more storms and bigger storms. So some areas with climate change are actually going to get drier because there's going to be more evaporation and more drought. And then other areas are going to get more intense and more frequent storms. So those are the 6 pieces of evidence for climate change. All of these things point to the fact that climate change is in fact happening and it is changing the climate of the planet.